Voiceless Voice is one of the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! So today I'm going to teach you how to beat it. What's Potion? You got Matt here and welcome to another competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Video. Ever since Voiceless Voice's release back in Phantom Nightmare, the deck has been topping pretty much every single major event. And when we got the new support in Legacy of Destruction, the deck got even better. So if you're looking to play competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! And you don't know how to beat Voiceless Voice, then you're going to want to stick around. Because in this video, I'll show you the best cards to play against Voiceless Voice, when to use those cards, the choke points and weaknesses of the deck, and what decks are best suited to beat it. But first, if you're excited for the video and enjoying our How to Beat series, then make sure to smash the like button. If this video hits 250 likes, I'll bring you a top tier Voiceless Voice deck profile. Also, if you like competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Including deck profiles, guides on how to beat the best decks, meta discussions, and videos just like this one, you're gonna love this channel, so make sure to subscribe. But with that being said, here is the ultimate guide on how to beat Voiceless Voice in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Let's jump into it. So what's the main game plan for Voiceless Voice? Well, most of the time, Voiceless Voice is going to try and set up a combo that gives them 3 specific cards on the field. The first of which is going to be Low, as well as Skull Guardian, and usually Barriers of the Voiceless Voice. Just by having these 3 cards, it gives them a 4100 attack point on the negate, as well as targeting protection and of course follow-up for their next turn. Now that may not sound like much, and that's because it's just the bare bones of what the deck tries to do. Usually there's going to be so much more the deck has to offer, including cards in the graveyard for protection, most notably Prayers of the Voiceless Voice to give them extra recovery options, as well as big threats on field, including either form of Ceravis, the Old Man, or the Dragon, and of course Radiance for potential pop or special summon. And of course all this is usually backed up by multiple Handtraps. Voiceless Voice is one of the few meta decks that actually has an in-archetype form of Omni-Negation, which gives it a leg up against its competitors. It's also incredibly good at rebuilding its own end board on the fly, even on the opponent's turn, thanks to all the different ways they have to special summon out their ritual monsters. The deck also has many different ways to perform a ritual summon, which is key for what has historically been known as a pretty lackluster summoning mechanic. That includes ritual summoning with the effects of Prayers, Saphira, Blessing, and even the pseudo-ritual summoning of Radiance, the continuous trap card. That being said though, the Voiceless Voice deck is a pretty common formula, and this is what you should be expecting to go up against when playing Voiceless Voice. These are the actual Voiceless Voice cards you can expect to see, but keep in mind that Odd Eye's Pendulum Graph Dragon is a common replacement for the second copy of Ceravis. Then we add in non-archetype specific cards that act as engines in Pre-Preparation of Rites and the Diviner of the Herald package, which includes Herald of the Arclight and Entis in the extra deck for a search or a pop. Then add in whatever hand traps or optional consistency pieces you want. Usually there's 12 to 15 spots for that. And then fill out the extra deck with good toolbox cards. Just know that Voiceless Voice doesn't always use their extra deck, it's really just a toolbox to get them out of tricky situations. But this is a pretty standard Voiceless Voice deck. Some players have found success with a branded Voiceless Voice deck, which adds in a small branded package of 3 branded Fusion and 1 Fallen of Albaz. This not only baits out Ash Blossom, but also helps get Low or Saphira engraved for their effects, all while giving them an interruption with Mirror Jade. It's a solid build, but not as popular as the Melodious variant. This one can't play as many hand traps unless the deck size significantly increases, but adding in the Melodious package gives them a way to access Appaloosa before starting their plays to protect them from hand traps. This and pure Voiceless Voice are the 2 most common variants running around right now. But when looking at any variant of Voiceless Voice, the ratios you should be expecting to see more often than not are going to be 3 Low, 3 Saphira, 2 Skull Guardian, 1 to 2 Ceravis Ritual Monsters, 1 Ceravis the Old Man, 3 Barrier, 2 Prayers, 1 Blessing, and 1 Radiance with triple Diviner, and 1 Trias Hierarcha, and usually 3 copies of Pre-Prep. And the rest is just non-engine, but it's really important to know what the ratios are going to be so we know what cards are most important to hit in the strategy. But that being said, what does the end board for Voiceless Voice actually look like and how do we interact with it? Well, the end board can vary pretty significantly depending on what variant of Voiceless Voice you're playing. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you 3 separate combos for Voiceless Voice depending on the deck we're going to be using, and that shows you why the deck is so strong and how many good combos it actually has. Here's the basic 1-card combo with a pure Voiceless Voice deck. Starting off with Low, you're going to normal summon it and use the effect to place Barrier from the deck to your side of the field. Barrier effect to add Saphira, Saphira effect to send Prayers and add Skull Guardian. Banish Saphira to ritual summon using Low as the whole material for Skull Guardian. Skull Guardian effect as Chainlink 1, low as Chainlink 2. Low will summon itself back out and Skull Guardian will add Ceravis the dragon. Link 2 for Dynamundo and pass turn. In the draw phase, use Dynamundo's effect, attributing itself to special back out the Skull Guardian, and use Low's effect to summon itself, and then Low's effect on summon to place Radiance. This is pretty good for a 1-card combo considering there are 4 other cards in hand. Here's another combo, but this time with the branded variant. It's a 2.5 card combo with Branded Fusion and Barrier or Low and a discard. Start by activating Branded Fusion, sending Low and Albaz to the graveyard. If you started with Low in your hand, then send Trias Hierarcha instead. This will summon out Albion. Use Albion's effect to banish itself and the Albaz to fusion summon for Lubellion. Activate Lubellion by discarding the blank card for cost to shuffle back in the Albion and the Albaz back into the deck, and then summon out Mirror Jade. Activate Barrier to add Saphira. Saphira effect, send Prayers, add Skull Guardian. Banish Saphira to ritual summon Skull Guardian by using Lubellion as tribute. Skull Guardian effect as Chainlink 1, Low effect as Chainlink 2. Low will summon itself back out, and Skull Guardian adds Ceravis. On summon, Low will place Radiance in the spell and trap zone. Radiance then shuffles back Prayers into the deck to summon out Ceravis Dragon Sage. And finally, here's a Melodious Voiceless Voice combo. Starting off with Ostinato and Low. Activate Ostinato and send 2 refrains from deck to graveyard to special summon out Baka. Baka will activate the effect to special refrain from the deck. Refrain effect on summon will search for Couplet, and Couplet when added specials a refrain from the graveyard. Scale Couplet and add Concerto. Activate Concerto, sending Couplet and Refrain to the extra deck to fuse for Baka, and use both Couplet and Refrain effects to place them in the Pendulum Zone. Overlay the 2 level 7 Bakas for the rank 7 Absolute Dragon, and then link Absolute Dragon and Refrain for a copy of Beyond the Pendulum. Now we have a pretty big Chainlink to order. Chainlink 1 will be Concerto, Chainlink 2 Beyond, paying 1200 life points for cost, Chainlink 3 Baka, Chainlink 4 Absolute Dragon. Working backwards, Absolute Dragon will summon out Vortex, Baka will special summon Refrain, Beyond will add the Pendulum Graph Dragon, Concerto will bottom deck itself and draw 1 card. Then perform your Pendulum Summon by bringing out Low and Pendulum Graph Dragon from the hand. Low effect on summon will place Barrier, and Barrier will add Saphira. Link Refrain and Beyond the Pendulum for Exceed the Pendulum, and then Exceed effect will add back one of the refrains in your face-up extra deck to hand. Then use Exceed the Pendulum's effect to perform a mini Pendulum Summon for the copy of Refrain you just added back. Then you'll link that Refrain and the Exceed the Pendulum for Appaloosa for 2 negates. And then it's basically just full Voiceless Voice combo. Saphira sends Prayers, adding Skull Guardian. Saphira will banish itself to ritual summon using Low as the full material for Skull Guardian. Chainlink 1 Skull, Chainlink 2 Low. Low will summon itself back out, and Skull Guardian will search for Ceravis Dragon Sage, also known as the Old Man. Special summon the Old Man by shuffling back into the deck Prayers and Ostinato, and then link Skull Guardian and Low for Dynamundo and pass the turn. There are so many more combos the deck can produce, as well as variations to the combos that I've shown you today, and if you want to see them, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If we hit 250 likes, I'll bring you a Voiceless Voice deck profile and a combo guide too. Now before I move on to the next section of the video, there are 2 cards that I wanted to highlight very quickly when it comes to Voiceless Voice that are very popular in the deck. The first of which is going to be Kashtira Fenrir and even a small Kashtira package. The reason why is twofold. First off, it offers a really great body for interruption by having just the generic Kashtira effects. But second, and arguably more importantly, is that they're level 7 bodies, which means they can be used for the entire ritual summon requirement for a copy of Skull Guardian. And the second card I wanted to highlight is going to be Odd Eye's Meteor Burst Dragon. This is almost exclusively for the Tenpai Dragon matchup. It can be easily made with Low and Diviner, assuming Diviner send a copy of Herald of the Arclight from the extra deck to the graveyard, making it a level 6. The reason why this can be so strong is because Meteor Burst Dragon prevents any monster effects from being activated by your opponents during the battle phase. So while these may not always be coming up, they are pretty common to see in Voiceless Voice decks going forward. But now that you know what the deck looks like, a few combos the deck can produce, and of course what the endboard is usually going to be, what are some cards that are going to help us against Voiceless Voice? Well, the first thing I wanted to do is talk about Handtraps, and these are the ones we're going to be talking about today. Ash Blossom is very good against Voiceless Voice, but there are just so many possible targets for it. It's great on Saphira's effect to send to the graveyard and add a card, it's awesome on Pre-Prep or Branded Fusion or Ostinato, and it's fine against Barrier or Skull Guardian, but not great. So while Ash is objectively a good card against the deck, a lot of the time it just doesn't do enough. There needs to be another piece of interruption or else Ash Blossom is basically ignored. My personal preference is to use Ash Blossom on Ostinato or on the Saphira. A lot of the time, Voiceless Voice players will use pre-prep as their way to check if Ash Blossom is in your opponent's hand because it's a free +1. Letting Ostinato resolve is just way too powerful, so unless you know they're not playing that variant, I would say you have to let the pre-prep slide. Droll is actually quite strong here, but its impact can be very hand dependent. The Melodious combo adds from deck to hand before a negate is live and before they can add with Barrier or Saphira. And even the pure Voiceless Voice line usually searches a few times, first with Barrier, then with Saphira, and finally with Skull Guardian. If I had Droll available in my deck, I would definitely keep it in there for Voiceless Voice. Both Effect Veiler and Infinite Impermanence are very good against Voiceless Voice, which may be a little surprising considering they have Barrier and Seravis to protect from targeting. But they're really important to use, especially on Low. The reason why is because it prevents Low from placing the continuous cards in the spell and trap zone, but also prevents Low from being used as the entire material for a ritual summon. Yes, there is targeting protection in the form of Seravis and to a lesser extent Trias Hierarcha, but you can't really play around those cards. Moving on to Nibiru. Nib is bad-ish. Like in pure Voiceless Voice, they can easily play under Nib. Even if they decide to extend to Dynamundo, it's still usually 4 summons. On the other hand, if they play Branded, then they play into Nib, but only once they have both Skull Guardian and Low on the field, so there's already a negate. And they can't even misplay by summoning out Dynamundo because Branded Fusion locks them into fusion monsters. And then for Melodious Voiceless Voice. You can nib them at a few points, but it never really feels good. If you nib them on Absolute Dragon, they'll still summon out the Vortex Dragon for a negate. And then they easily get to Appaloosa as well. In my opinion, the best way to use Nibiru is when paired with a card like Infinite Impermanence, but even then, they usually have both Vortex Dragon and Appaloosa on their side of the field. Basically, by the time they actually get to using their Voiceless Voice cards, they have plenty of protection from Nib. But if it resolves, it's going to be very strong. It just rarely is going to happen. Phantasme is also pretty bad here. Yeah, you can special it out most games, but you aren't really plussing off it. Don't play it. Skullmeister is pretty good, since out of habit, players are using Low in the graveyard as the highest chain link, and it can negate the Saphira effect to ritual summon in the graveyard as well. It's just not good enough this format to see consistent play, and even against Voiceless Voice, it's not always going to be the best option. Dimension Shifter seems like it would be crazy against this deck because they can't ritual summon with Saphira. They can't use the recycling effect of prayers, and the old man is harder to summon out, and Low can't summon itself from the banish zone. But they can still set up a decent end board through Shifter. If I were playing a Shifter deck, I would definitely keep it in over siding it out, but don't expect it to be a game-winning hand trap against Voiceless Voice unless they play Melodious Voiceless Voice and you can use it in response to the effect of Ostinato. Then it's a crazy card. Bestials are great against Voiceless. Banishing Low so they can't summon it back and so that Skull Guardian is weaker and without a negate is really nice, but they aren't as good as they used to be thanks to Blessing. But they are definitely cards to side in against Voiceless Voice almost all the time. DD Crow is great for the same reason as Bestials, just not as good. It's also able to banish the Low, but it doesn't give a body on the field, but it is still better than most hand traps. Ghost Bell is also good. There are a lot of effects that would special summon from the graveyard or shuffle cards from the graveyard back into the deck, and Ghost Bell can stop those. But the problem is, if you negate the effect, the resources will stay in grave where they can still be used for other effects. It's good but not good enough when compared to other hand traps. And Ghost Ogre is one of the very best hand traps against the deck. The continuous spells don't have an effect on activation. They're ignition effects, so Ogre can destroy them before they resolve so they won't finish the effect. Hand traps will always be important, but so will board breakers, and these are the ones we're going to be talking about today, starting off with Evenly Matched. As one of the only decks in the format today that has an in archetype on the negate, it's able to handle Evenly Matched decently well. But if you can force out the Skull Guardian negate with something like Infinite Impermanence for example before the targeting protection is live, then you have a really good chance of just blowing them out with a copy of Evenly Matched. If their negate is gone, Evenly becomes one of the best cards to use against this strategy. They keep so many resources on the field, and getting rid of their one copy of Blessings or Radiance can be crucial to winning. I think Dark Ruler No More is awful against Voiceless Voice. Sure, the Skull Guardian negate is gone, but they have so many ways to summon back another copy of Skull Guardian on your turn to turn it back on. As for Kaijus, Lava Golem, and Sphere Mode, I kind of like these cards because they don't let Voiceless Voice players trigger the effects of Prayer in the graveyard. But on the other hand, it doesn't really take away their ability to use the back row. If I had to rank them, Spear Mode is the worst, followed by Lava Golem, and then finally Kaijus. Change of Heart can be really good because taking control of Skull Guardian or Low is awesome. But unfortunately, Change of Heart targets, and there are so many cards that protect from targeting in this deck, which means it's usually going to be a dead card in this matchup. But Triple Tactic Talents is significantly better. It's relatively easy to force out the Skull Guardian on the negate, and at that point every single talent's effect is really strong. I love Fenrir when it comes to dealing with Voiceless Voice. It either baits out the negate from Skull Guardian or the pop with Radiance, but when it doesn't, it can really start ripping apart their back row and getting rid of their other resources. Its effect can also be used on Attack Declaration, which gives you the chance to target cards after getting rid of the back row. Board wipes like Raigeki and Dark Hole are fine. They usually force out the negate from Skull Guardian or force them to activate prayers in the graveyard, but Lightning Storm and Harpy's Feather Duster are just better by a long shot because they get rid of the back row. And finally is Cosmic Cyclone. It's an incredible card going first and going second. Getting rid of the continuous spell and trap cards is extremely important when it comes to Voiceless Voice, but typically players will use it for trap decks or for floodgates. But it's incredibly good against Voiceless Voice too. There are definitely some cards that I missed talking about in this section, but I'll get to them shortly. To do that, we have to talk about cards that are good going first and cards that are good going second. Starting off with cards that are good going first. Dimensional Barrier is incredible against this deck. It shuts down their best plays to Ritual Summon, but it can be pretty weak towards the Branded and Melodious variants as they can still set up a different combo. And the same goes for Simul Archfiends, which is actually better against the non-pure variants of Voiceless Voice. As for going second, Forbidden Droplet is an amazing choice here. It's a great option because it doesn't target, so it plays around the barrier, but keep in mind they do have ways to summon out additional copies of Skull Guardian on your turn if the case comes up. While it's a very good card, it's not good enough alone. And Super Polymerization is a decent choice. It's not perfect because they can trigger the effects of prayers, for example, but it still is a solid option to get rid of a large portion of their end board. Now for some choke points and weaknesses of the deck. The first one I want to talk about is going to be Saphira's effect in general, and honestly, both effects. The effect for them to Foolish Burial a card and add a card from deck to hand is incredibly powerful. If you can stop that, they may not have the resources to be able to actually summon out their copies of their ritual monsters. Speaking of which, the second effect to be able to ritual summon may usually be their only way to ritual summon on their turn, which means no Skull Guardian for the negates. So if you have a DD Crow or a Bestial, I would highly recommend using it to get it out of the graveyard before they can activate their effect to ritual summon. Blessing is the new support from Legacy of Destruction, and it is a significant weakness for the deck. And the reason why is because before Legacy of Destruction, the deck had a really hard time recurring resources from the Banish Zone. Blessing really addresses that, but they only play one copy in the deck at the most. So if you can get rid of that copy, their grind game is going to be significantly weaker. And finally, of course, is Low. Low is like the main playmaker of the deck. If you can stop them from getting access to continuous spells or just get rid of it completely by either putting it back into the deck or banishing it, it makes dealing with the Skull Guardian that much easier. And lastly, I'm going to talk about 3 different decks and how they interact with Voiceless Voice. One happens to have a good matchup, one has a bad matchup, and one has an average matchup. The one with a good matchup is going to be Snake Eye, which kind of has a good matchup against pretty much everything. It's really good because it can keep up with Voiceless Voice's advantage game while also playing a ton of hand traps too. On the other hand, Tenpai Dragon has an average matchup, where the deck itself really wants to be able to go second, and Voiceless Voice can set up a really scary end board backed with multiple different hand traps, and of course they can set up Odd Eye's Meteor Burst Dragon, which can shut down Tenpai Dragon. And a deck with a bad matchup is going to be Labyrinth. Not because it's a bad deck by any means, but because the deck itself really wants to outgrind their opponent and have more resources than they do. That's just how a trap deck works, and Voiceless Voice does a really good job of keeping the resources very high, which means they can out-advantage the Labyrinth player pretty quickly. Overall, Voiceless Voice is a fantastic deck and definitely one of the top 5 decks of the format in my opinion. It's also a deck with a lot of representation, even though it does have a few weaknesses. And if you're going to YCS Indie, be sure to expect to play against multiple Voiceless Voice players. And there you have it, you now know how to beat Voiceless Voice in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Now let me know down in the comments below, what are you playing this format and how are you planning on beating Voiceless Voice? If you made it this far in the video, you must have enjoyed it, so make sure to smash the like button and of course subscribe to the channel for more amazing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter and join the Discord server, both of which are linked in the description, and of course shout out to our channel members as well. Your support goes a long way into helping the channel grow, and if you want to become a channel member yourself, then click the join button down below. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time.